Hello, and you're very welcome along. Welcome back even to the RTÉ Rugby podcast. We are back after our summer holidays. We'll be with you right through to the end of next season, the end of this rugby season, which feels very, very far away right now. The plan for the next few weeks on the RTÉ Rugby pod, we're going to be bringing you a podcast every Wednesday as usual around the Rugby World Cup games. And once the tournament kicks off, we're going to ramp that up to 2 pods a week for the duration of the tournament. We've had a couple of short podcasts dotted along over the last few weeks as well. I spoke to Tadhg Furlong last week, Ian Henderson a couple of weeks before that as well. So look back over the RTÉ Rugby podcast feed to get those and catch up on those. Today, though, delighted to welcome back a chilled out and suntanned Bernard Jackman with us. Birch, how's it going? Did you have a nice summer?
The only tan I'd ever have is be out of a bottle. Yeah, I won't go there with Warren Gatland. Stitched up myself and Trevor Brennan back in the day and made us wear a fake tan. But it's the only time I ever had it on, and that's pretty obvious to anyone who sees me. I'm like Casper the Ghost. But no, great summer, yeah. Down
I hope you got out of the country in the last month anyway.
No, I mean back. I went early. So I was in Portugal in June. But being back and look at it's been a slow build up, I think, to these autumn internationals. But I think once Saturday starts, it'll build. And obviously we've had a Rugby Championship over the last 3 or 4 weeks that has certainly been of interest. And then the 20s, yeah, the rugby season doesn't seem like it only stopped for about 2 weeks really, if you include the under 20s obviously and the great run they had to the final. So but no, I'm excited by it. It's going to be good.
Yeah, I get back from holidays kind of the end of or start of July, and you're kind of wondering, geez, what are we going to do now for the next few weeks? And all of a sudden the 20s are on top of you, and you're keeping an eye on Rugby Championship as well. As you said, there isn't much of a break in it. And even I was mapping out in my head there how many weeks we're going to be doing these podcasts for now that we're back for the new season, and you look ahead and the URC and everything's running up past June, and then you've got summer tours coming. We're talking about 11 months here, an 11-month season pretty much starting this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I'd be interested in Gaelic games as well. And when you look at what they've done, they've condensed their season so much. I mean, county stuff is over now. So it's a very short, sharp season for them. But probably they're in the shop window for a very limited amount of time as well. And rugby, whether you like it or not, has become nearly a 12-month season if you actually enjoy the Southern Hemisphere stuff. So yeah, we're certainly going to be kept busy, but as always, there's always going to be lots of different things to talk about and talking points, and hopefully some great games to review as well.
Yeah, and one thing obviously that kept us busy over the last few weeks before we even talk about the warm-up games themselves, but obviously Johnny Sexton's suspension was something that the potential for the suspension was something that was hanging around for a good few weeks, and then eventually in mid-July we finally got word about it. So a 3-game ban for Johnny Sexton arising from the Champions Cup final at the end of May. I'm not so much concerned about whether we think it's a right or a wrong suspension. More so when he does return, it's going to be presumably the opening game of the Rugby World Cup against Romania on the 9th of September. But crucially, 38 years old, won't have played in 6 months. Does that make you feel a little bit uneasy?
I don't think it's ideal. I think he would have probably only played 1 game of those 3, to be honest.
Careful now, he would have played all 3 of those, Bernard. He would have played all 3 of them.
Sorry, yeah. He would have been available for all 3 and whatever. But I think he probably would have only got a significant amount of game time in 1. And I think he's been back running for quite a while. Like, it was a serious injury, but he's been back straight line running for quite a while. They're doing a huge amount of rugby at camp now, so I think that's been one of the big learnings. So what really frustrated me, I think, is we all heard about these reviews of the previous World Cups, but there actually wasn't much change. And one of the big things when I was involved in 3 World Cup preps, and speaking to people who were involved in 2015, 2019, one of the player kind of the synopsis from players was one of the big things they got wrong was way too much S&C control, way too much gym off-field conditioning, which had them in great shape physically. They looked $1 million, but when it came to actual rugby fitness, they felt they were a little bit off and a little bit behind and didn't really get enough game time in their legs. So Certainly, from what I understand, there's been a really good balance and mix, and they've been doing rugby pretty much, as quickly as they could and doing lots of it and getting their fitness through that. And so from that point of view, Johnny will be involved in all of that. And also, I think at 38, if you look back over the last, 18, 19 years, he has had a lot of injuries, and he's been one of those players who's been able to come back and hit his straps, pretty much immediately. So, with other players, it's far from ideal, but with him, he's been through this before. The way Ireland are training, and he'll be at the core of that, is doing a huge amount to simulate the demands of a game. So, it's far from ideal, but I think we can cope, particularly having that Romania game, as a way of just getting his eye in.
Yeah, and I think you said having that Romania game is like, if it was a bigger game, would you possibly have a fear that, having been out for so long, and more so as well with retirement coming in, 4 or 5 or 6 more games, that he could potentially start to force the issue a little bit and just kind of get a little bit impatient out on the pitch, but maybe having a game like Romania where the stakes probably aren't as high would be helpful in that regard.
Yeah, well, look, I think at this stage he has so much experience. He'll know not to force it, but definitely you would just feel it's the ideal game for him to just get back up to speed, and then it's going to be really interesting how far it uses him in the group stages. Like, do you play me against South Africa? When you look at the way the draw is there a significant difference playing France or New Zealand? Obviously, we'd see more on the opening night in a quarterfinal if we're good enough to get there. Than that warrants risking someone like Johnny Sexton or 3 or 4 other kind of key players that we can't do without. And obviously, you can't wrap them in cotton wool, but I don't know. I'm not really sure. There's a huge advantage to going out of the group 1 or 2, to be honest.
Yeah, and particularly with the way New Zealand are looking at the Rugby Championship, which we'll get to in a little while as well. But I was going to talk about it later, but I might bring it up now since you mentioned it a couple of minutes ago. But the way they're training at the moment, I think that the common thread basically is that it's vastly different to 2019 and years before. Paul O'Connell was asked about how just preseason general has changed, not so much from what the feedback they've had it from 2019, but more so from his own playing days. And he was talking about how, back in the day you were doing just this huge volume of running and conditioning work, and how he said it was almost easy to train your mind to just focus in on doing this. I wouldn't necessarily agree with that part, but he said you could essentially just put your head down and get through that horrible fitness, and you do your skills games afterwards. Whereas I think the game in general has probably changed to a point now where everything is focused on what you're doing out on the pitch. And if, you kind of put the rugby first and fit the conditioning around it, rather than doing the conditioning and playing a bit of rugby on the side as well.
Yeah, it has changed. And I suppose the beauty of it is, from an Irish point of view, our head of conditioning, Jason Cowman, is vastly experienced. He's been involved in the last World Cup. Farrell was involved in the last World Cup. They do train differently anyway. This isn't anything new, but in terms of rugby is at the core of everything. The only difference is, and this is where sometimes it's been an issue, is when teams go into World Cup mode. So normally the Irish players who Andy Farrell has, for 3 years out of 4, he has them for that June summer tour. Mm-hmm. Which isn't a pre-season. It's it's like a match week during Six Nations. He has them in November, which isn't a pre-season, and he has them in the Six Nations. So that's the challenge. Is basically looking after him as a group for that pre-season and putting rugby at the core there. And I think that's brilliant. But also Ireland, there's nothing wrong with doing hard conditioning sessions, but doesn't have with the balls not involved. If you look at Wales, so Wales have gone back to where do they go? They're in Turkey at the moment. They were in Switzerland for a week camp as well, because that's what they did before Japan, where they got to a semi-final and actually could have beaten the South Africans in the semi-final. So Gatland has gone back to what's worked. The Welsh players believe in that because that's what's worked in the past, and he's copy and pasting. Whereas we're a little bit different. We've had failure or underperformance, and now
we're still trying to find the plan that works.
Yeah, we are. But there's more. It's more likely this will work because this is what the players have been doing for the province for the last couple of years. This is what they normally do in Irish camp. But like that's important. Even the perception that what we did in the past didn't work is effectively the reality in the player's mind. So you need to give them things that make them feel we're doing something different. Particularly when some of those players had been to 2015, 2019, and obviously some like Johnny had been to the one before that.
Yeah, and it was interesting as well. When I was chatting to Ian Henderson a few weeks ago, he was saying that one of the big things the coaching team did was there was a lot more consultation with the players over not so much like what they want, but what they're looking to get out of the program and how they feel they'll be able to get to their best. And I think they said, a large portion of what they said is that they're rugby players first and foremost, and that's what they want to get onto. In general, as a coach, how much have you seen the way preseason training and things like that have been approached down the years? Was there a kind of a big bang moment where everyone decided there's a new way of doing things, or has it been a kind of a gradual trickle?
Yeah, it's been gradual, to be honest, and it's like everyone copies each other, and then you have outliers. Like, I mean, probably what Gatland is doing is rare now, whereas in the past, and he got a bit of slack about it because they did this SAS army camp, and and there was like
basically waterboarding,
things like that. Well, look at which is probably controversial for sure, and he got a lot of criticism over that. But as I said, that's what he knows, that's what he believes in, and some of the playing group that he has have had success from that type of training. But in general, there's a lot more. Nearly all teams now are much more focused on trying to integrate the conditioning into the rugby, and players enjoy playing rugby, and nearly you get the fitness without really kind of but like it's not as big a strain on you as what Paul O'Connell's talking about, where you go to athletics track and you run a set of interval runs with a stopwatch. That's some people, old school people, say it's good for you, to the mental challenge. But I think you can get working your skills, working your patterns, working your shape, and get fit. Through involving the ball.
Mm-hmm. To loop back around to the out half situation, then if you're Ross Byrne or Jack Crowley, do you want to get out there this week against Italy, plant your flag in the ground, so to speak, or would you have a feeling that whoever was to start against England or in 2 weeks' time would be the likely front runner behind Sexton?
I think every minute they get is going to be a chance for them to impress. I mean, I think the selection for England is going to be really interesting, particularly at 10, because whoever gets that is in a great position to lay down a marker and put their hand up. But I think the beauty of the way they're training means that Farrell is getting to look at both of them, over every day in pressurized situation. I mean, they've got a very good squad in camp. There's not many places up for grabs, but there is places up for grabs. But there's certainly starting positions. So whoever's playing 10 in either of those teams is going to be challenged, and they're going to have to bring the best out of the players around them. So I would say he's already learned a lot. I think he's already learned a lot, and obviously then the exposure to an internet playing against another test country will form more of his opinion. But I also think, I mean, we need to be careful of what we expect. Like, I wouldn't judge too much in these games either. They effectively are friendlies. I know some people would argue all test matches are, bar World Cups and Six Nations, but they are going to be for Steve Bortwick, for Kieran Crowley, and for Andy Farrell in particular, and the Samoan coaches as well, to try different combinations, have a little look at things without it really being at the level they're going to hit once that World Cup starts off in September.
Yeah, and like they are always a strange dynamic, those warm-up games, where for some players, the kind of real frontline players who are pretty much assured of their place in the squad, they're about getting through. It's about literally just getting to the end of those games in one piece and being in your squad. For other players though, who are on the fringes, or just looking at some of the uncapped players in the Irish group, I mean, they're actually the biggest games these guys have played in their lives, because it is potentially their one shot to make an impression and hopefully sneak into a World Cup squad. Maybe if an injury to someone else kind of opens a door for them.
Yeah, it's a very tricky one to get your head right for, especially if you're one of those frontliners, or maybe your last World Cup, etc. You want to get on the plane, but we know in sport, if you're not 100% committed, that's when you're more likely to get injured. It's not the only time, but it's a tricky one, and I think again, like, there's probably the intensity that Farrell can get in some of his training sessions won't be far off, test match anyway, and the physicality that will come in those little blocks, are there's a risk of injury there as well. So I think they'll be in a good place, and the players, if you look at our squad, I think Farrell has done a great job of building depth, but also getting players very comfortable. If you look at someone like Keane Prendergast, he's been in and around the Irish squad now for 2 years without obviously building up a huge amount of caps, but he knows what it's like in there. He knows what he'll feel comfortable, and he's just an example. And then you have the fellas who've got 20, 30 caps now and have been part of that for the last 4 years, and that's that cohesion that people say is a core part of kind of Leinster being very hard to beat, is a big bonus, a big strength of Irish rugby. And Farrell, by being I think he's a very steady selector, and has kind of had a long-term outlook on things, has helped create that. He doesn't chop and change all the time. He's pretty comfortable in the type of player he likes, and I think that's an advantage for us, to be honest.
Yeah, the team for the Italy game is going to be picked tomorrow. It's almost an impossible team to actually predict, but I might ask you, what are the kind of combinations, or what are the players you'd like to see this weekend? Not so much the ones you think will be there, because as I said, given the way the World Cup warm-up games are, you actually just don't even know what way teams are going to line out or what combinations are going to be put in.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind. Like, I thought Gavin Coombs end of season was phenomenal. I mean, the way he reacted to that, I suppose, setback, like the team struggled that night in November against New Zealand A, but his work rate, his impact both sides of the ball, was phenomenal. Now, is it going to be too late to make a push? That Irish back row has been pretty settled, and obviously you have Tadhg Furlong who can come into the picture there in either the second row or back row as well. So it is going to be hard. Prendergast, I would say some of the fringe guys, this is an opportunity for them to get some game time. And look, like, they will have a plan for every individual. So, Peter Manny at Tadhg Furlong, do they need a game this early? Probably not. But what are they going to do over the next 3 weeks, 4 weeks to have them ready for that first week in France? Is Romania, is that game part of their, personal preparation to be ready for Scotland, South Africa?
Yeah, is it for all intents and purposes a fourth warm up?
Yeah.
All respect to.
Yeah, I think look, it has to be. I mean, like, we have to be respectful, but we also have to realize that the days of World Cup shocks, to that extent, we shouldn't be considering that. We have the tools to go and win that game, and there's a big divide in a lot of those tier 2 countries, and tier 1, despite World Rugby doing their level best to try and level it up, it's going to take a lot of time, a lot of money to be able to get more teams who are competitive at the top tier 1 level teams. So yeah, I would expect this to be a mainly, I suppose, non-first 15 game with certain players that you would say are likely to start for Ireland, who tend to need more game time getting a look. But I think I wouldn't be reading anything into it. I'd just be hoping we get through without any major injuries and start to build a little bit of confidence in some of the areas that we've been working on specifically. And that's the key. Another problem with previous World Cups was, in general, we had no kind of performance leading into it that calmed everyone down, and they felt, we actually are in good shape now. But also, like, back to 2019, it wasn't just the warm-up games. It was the Six Nations before that. Not that we were struggling. Obviously, this is totally different with this group. They finished the Six Nations with a Grand Slam. So maybe they don't need a trademark performance, whatever. But I think it would be no harm, if against Italy or England or Samoa, and there was a really strong period where we just looked at our best.
We kind of touched on it there a couple of minutes ago, but obviously the injury scare and worry coming into these games is the one that kind of hangs over every player. Joey Carberry was the man in 2019. Remember, David Wallace did his cruciate ligament against England in 2011. Jordan Murphy breaking his leg in 2003 are some of the big examples. It's a tough one for players, I'd imagine, to square their heads around. On the face of it, you probably just have to say, every game it's an occupational hazard. You might get injured, and you just have to play this game as if it's normal. But it's very hard. It's very easy, I should say, to say that before a game. But to actually convince yourself this is just one normal game, go out and do what you always do, is probably hard to get your head around.
Yeah, but as I said, I think your contact session on Tuesday is just as dangerous. From an outsider, it is, and over the course of the week, will for a split second the players think about that. They will, but this is what they do. This is what they do, and they've been doing since at a high level since they were 15, 16.
The day you go out trying not to get injured is
honestly, I wouldn't. They are all aware that every time they put on a pair of boots, there's that risk. But it doesn't stick long in their mind. They're able to park it and go out and do what they do. And also, as I said, the way they would be training now, they would be robust from doing as much contact work, or the right amount of contact work that they need. Not too much, not too little, but they'll have their eye in. Whereas in the past, I'm not saying international level, but certainly sometimes clubs can or players can go from 0 to 100, where it's all conditioning, and next thing there's a friendly match, and they haven't had that chance to build up to it. So I think that's improved as well. But yet it's a contact sport. Yet there could be soft tissue injuries, that we haven't prepared for. That would be something maybe. We had a lot of hamstring injuries last year, and sometimes that
started the Six Nations. Yeah,
exactly. Sorry, the start of the season. I started this calendar year, and that shouldn't be happening. That should not be happening. And that sometimes is a change in a gym exercise or the change in loading, etc. And obviously Munster went through it, at the start of the season, but they changed how they train. Now again, because of the data that we have from the 4 provinces, the data that Farrell has on every single player, because it's shared, but also what they've been able to do in Irish camp, that shouldn't be an issue. But it's certainly something that, if we were to have a couple of soft tissue injuries, would be a red flag. And unfortunately, if it happens late in August, it could cost somebody a trip to the World Cup.
Yeah, and I think it was Ian Henderson and Tadhg Furlong as well mentioned it when we were chatting to them, that I think it was the first week or so of the World Cup camp where they did ease off things ever so slightly, just wary of what had happened back in January. So obviously it's something that they've looked into as well. One final person on the Irish team I want to talk about before we touch quickly on the Rugby Championship over the last few weeks, but Tadhg Furlong coming in now off the back of what ended up being a pretty difficult season with this niggling little calf injury that has just been hanging around with him for about a year or so. He mentioned how he thought he was through the end of it, and then picked it up a couple of weeks before the Champions Cup final, aggravated it again. Played through the injury in the Champions Cup final, and I don't know. Do you remember he kind of came off very early in the second half? That's obviously been a good while now. He's had plenty of time to rehab it. He's back in full training and everything, and he's available for selection, whether or not he plays this week or against England in a couple of weeks. But is the way that injury has followed him around specifically over the last year or so, would that concern you ever so slightly going into the World Cup?
Yeah, it absolutely would. 100% would. It's not something you want to see. Injuries are part and parcel of the game, but those type of ones which just hang around and never really clear up, or never really cleared up for him last year, which was obviously highly frustrating for him. He's spoken about it. Sometimes calf injuries can be related to a back injury, and I'm sure they've done countless checks on all of his body and his style of running, his gait, everything to try and make sure that they identify what's causing it. But ironically, sometimes it's that break. It's that, like, if you think back to last year, he would have always been chasing to get back for a big game. And sometimes when you do that, you just never get it cleared up properly. Sometimes you get away with it. It doesn't flare up again, but he just had that niggle, and that period where there was no game and they could just take their time. And obviously the goal was September. That may have been the rest or the period of time that he needed. But I think he's going to be a key man for us, and we need him fit. And look, we've built more depth there, but look at people like Tadhg Furlong, are world renowned for a reason. They can do things that most tight heads can't do, and for us to go deep in the World Cup, I think it's pretty important that he's back and robust and at his best as well.
Yeah, fingers crossed that's all cleared up by the time he's back playing. So that is the Ireland chat. Ireland against Italy this Saturday evening at the Aviva Stadium, 8:00 kickoff, live on RT2 and RT Player and on RT Radio 1 as well. On the Rugby Championship, Birch, pretty simply, reports of the All Blacks' demise look fairly wide of the mark.
Yeah, they're back. Wow. Been really impressive, haven't they? Like you would say, there's the Joe Schmidt influence is evident, and not the type of game maybe that he was synonymous with the end in Ireland, but just ruthless efficiency at the basics. Like, they're just so efficient. And I mean, Australia, I know Australia are getting slated, and the result was a very clear and convincing win for the All Blacks. But there was a period of the game where Australia had really good territory, had possession dominance. We're asking the right questions of the All Blacks.
Pretty close game for 50 odd minutes.
Yeah, it was. But again, probably you just saw the Australia kind of not having that efficiency in the right areas. When then the All Blacks got the ball, it was just clean. It was just clean. It was crisp, ruthless, and they converted a very high percentage of chance. And that's that. The great All Black teams have always been really good at that. And it's soul destroying for a team when you have that territory, you have that possession, and you just can't get points on the board, and then you lose the ball and you concede 7. And then they have obviously the X factor. They have the firepower. They have the power. They look physically in a really good place. So there was always a feeling, well, if you could bully them at on the collision in collisions on the gain line, that you would take it away from them. But I don't see this team at the moment being weak in that area. And yeah, it's look at the reality about New Zealand is historically when they failed at World Cups, it was probably because they went a year out. They were just the best team in the world, clearly. And I think, and then they failed at the World Cup, and there was a big audit and a big review, and it took them 4 years before they could actually test out whether they were whether they fixed those leak points. I think they got that last summer. They got exposed last summer, and Ireland losing a Test series to Ireland, obviously caused a lot of stress. Some changes. Obviously Foster isn't being kept on post World Cup. But I think they have galvanized them. They've worked out what they did wrong, and they've corrected that. And they're probably going to be a better team going to the World Cup for that than if they went into this World Cup number one in the world, winning games by 25, 30 points, because that hasn't always led them to their holy grail in the past. And I think Joe being in there, experience of the World Cup for Ireland, and Fozzie's obviously quite experienced now as well. Some very experienced senior player group, and obviously the talent that they have in spades. I think they're coming at the right time, to be honest. And yeah, it's just a pity that we might have to play them.
Yeah, it's a pity we're gonna have to. We might have to play them or France. That's the hard part. As good as it was in the way they blew Australia apart late on in that game, the most impressive chunk was probably the way they started against South Africa. And on South Africa, kind of hard to get a full reading on them yet. They've been brilliant at times, a little bit average at times as well, like that early period against New Zealand. But you do get the feeling they're just kind of working their way through these games and ironing out a few creases as they find them.
Yeah, they have a game model that would be very difficult to beat in the World Cup. And I know Argentina posed some questions, but I think Argentina are on the up as well. I mean, they had a good win in Australia. They've got a lot of talent now. Obviously, Czech is in there, Felipe. If they had a better goal kicker, they possibly would have beaten the Box. But the way the Box play, they're never going to, well, they're very rarely going to go pull away and look flashy. But when you get into a fight, a battle with them, they're very hard to overcome. And
they're the kind of team that
exposed. Sorry,
I said they're the kind of team that'll hammer someone by 15 points.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And but yet the team who get hammered by 15 points would feel like it was 40. If you understand, that's how dominant they can be. Yeah. They suffocate you. So I think that I would be very wary of them as being a potential winner. To be honest, I think Razzie has, for all the negativity around him, he has a bit of a Midas touch. He has the ear of his players, and he, we saw from the Chasing the Sun. We know from documentary about the last World Cup. We know from talking to Munster players and coaches who worked with him. He's a good salesman, and he, regardless of what happens in this Rugby Championship, he's a lot of the same squad who were there in Japan. He has a lot of talent. He's got a savage bench. He's got some serious depth in a lot of positions, and he will have them believing that they can win a back-to-back World Cup. Plus, the way they play in cup matches, which obviously you're coming into now, knockout rugby, is very, very effective. So, yeah, I think the Rugby Championship, bar Australia, Southern Hemisphere. So I think the Northern Hemisphere has been dominant the last couple of years, and the Southern Hemisphere teams look to be a little bit wishy-washy, a bit iffy, but I think they're coming at the right time. I think Argentina are obviously on the other side of the draw, and they look in good health. And we know that at World Cups they get to a different level in terms of their team connection. But I think Czech has given them, and Felipe's experience over in Leinster as a coach has given them another kind of angle, a different perception. Their players are now across the world again, whereas I don't think that the Jaguares, like the starting team for the Argentina playing the Super Rugby together, okay, create a lot of cohesion, but they didn't have that special bond when they came together for their country. So, and also Australia, like, they still have a lot of talent. I know Eddie's getting us in the neck, and you, at the moment, you would say, why did this ARU kind of make that decision on Dave Rennie? But I don't know. Like, in some ways, I still hope for Eddie Jones. He has that Midas touch around World Cups, and he can get Australia, being competitive again. But you look at that group. That group is mental. The Australia group.
Yeah, that's what I was going to, like, as Australia haven't been good in this championship really at all, and particularly around the mental execution of
Yeah.
things and discipline and stuff like that. But as we've kind of been saying for the last 6-7 months, or even longer than that since they got rid of Dave Rennie, but ultimately Australia don't have to improve significantly to get to a World Cup semi-final at the very least. Like they've got, even as they are right now, they have an excellent shot of getting to a semi-final. Whether or not they would be good enough to beat who they play there is another thing. But once if you can find yourself in the last four of a World Cup, anything can really happen off the back of that. What I would be tearing my hair out, and nearly have been over the last few years. I've been kind of tracking for the last 2 years. I've been tracking the discipline of the big teams in the world, the Rugby Championship and Six Nations sides, and how many cards they were getting. Initially, it was more so around, I wanted to see how people were adapting to head-high tackles and stuff. And in the end, it's just got to a point now where I'm just kind of curious to see the discrepancy between some of the big sides. And in 2 years, Australia have now played 31 games, and they're averaging a card every game over those 2 years. 28 yellows and 3 reds in 31 games. They've had 5 yellows in three games over the Rugby Championship. Ireland, in that 2-year span, they've only played 21 matches, but they've only had 2 yellows. And it's just like the discrepancy, particularly between the Six Nations sides and the Rugby Championship sides, has been fascinating. But also just how game on game, it seems Australia are just giving up 10-20 minute chunks where they're playing with 14 players.
Yeah, it's crazy. And I said it's not just the stats you've given are include Dave Rennie, some of his period as well.
Yeah.
But
Mostly his period, to be honest.
Yeah, it was, but it hasn't been any improvement. But I think some of that indiscipline's coming from a lack of understanding of what they're trying to do. Like they're not on the same page, and like I think the question mark I have about Eddie is he like, so most of his assistant coaches haven't got significant experience in rugby union, right? So we know that there's lots of really good elements of rugby league, and obviously Farrell and Sean Edwards are two coaches who've transitioned from that, but they both have built up a significant period of experience in rugby union, and now they're at the top level, whereas Eddie's taking guys just out of the league and asking them to coach their attack and their defense. And because I think their systems are so poor, their systems aren't bedded in strongly enough that they're not able to keep the ball or not able to defend for long enough periods, and that creates this lack of discipline to a certain extent, desperation. Someone trying to pull a rabbit out of a hat to get the ball back when they're being starved. So that's what, like, the All Blacks were just so good at keeping the ball. Eventually, you just saw Australia not being able to cope with that, or an Australian player, and making a rash decision, which leads to the cards. Like, I'll give you an example. So Eddie's backroom staff, so he's brought in this guy, and I know him. He's a really good fella. He's a French guy who was in Bath as a video analyst. His name's Pierre-Henry Broncon, and he got a job in Cast. Okay, Eddie gets sacked from England. Eddie likes to be busy. He goes to Cast on the invitation of Pierre to observe, to do some shadowing, to take some sessions, etc., which is brilliant. Pierre gets sacked by Cast. Now Pierre is with Australia, and his job is mall consultant. Okay, right. So I honestly, my experience of Pierre-Henry Broncon, he doesn't have a huge track record of being a mall expert, right? Okay. Do teams need a mall consultant? Maybe they do, and it's a bit important part of the game. Paul O'Connell does it for Ireland, does a phenomenal job. But look at their mall. I don't know if you saw. Yeah, you saw the game. Their mall against New Zealand, their mall defense and their mall attack was like they met in the car park. You know what I mean? So they kept turning down points to kick to the corner. They never once looked like, in my opinion, that they had the plan to take the ball down and actually maul New Zealand over. Right? It actually turned. They lost the ball 2 or 3 times, and likewise, when New Zealand kicked to the corner, it was so easy. Do you know what I mean? And then again, can it be fixed? Absolutely, can be fixed. But Eddie Jones is a phenomenal coach and has a massive legacy in the game. He understands the game. He's always thinking about where it's going. I just wonder, and this isn't just Australia, England as well. Is he nearly trying to be too clever? And is that leading to confusion on the field with his teams? And that, I think, is the question mark. And can he now get it right, in a very short period of time? Like, there's a strong chance they're going to go to the World Cup on the back of 5 losses. And when you look at individuals in that team, I don't think that that's the level that they should be at. Also, is that going to affect their confidence? But you're right. They could be below par and still get to a semi-final, and then are they able to pull a big performance out? But at the moment, you would say the ARU made a mistake. I think chopping Rennie when they did. I think Eddie probably played a hand in that. I think he probably said to him, "Look, if you don't get me for the World Cup, I won't be available after it." And they wanted this personality. He's doing a lot of work. He is doing a lot of work off the field in terms of trying to, get rugby union back on the back pages of the papers and stuff like that. But realistically, he needs to get wins, and this Australian team should be better than they are at the moment.
Yeah, and I think, as you said earlier on, it's just, while Australia aren't particularly playing well, it just adds to the fact that this side of the draw is just like the complete Wild West at the World Cup. And while it's not necessarily teams in good form, it's just going to make for some really unpredictable and really exciting games. Lastly, before we finish up, Paul O'Connell was talking about how eagerly he was watching the ruck during the Rugby Championship. Any just kind of gameplay things, any little trends sticking out for you from what you saw over those 3 rounds of matches?
Yeah, look, I think it's pretty much consistent with what we saw at the end of the year, where the referees will favour the attacking team. The angle you come in at, and the legality of it is less important than quick ball and keeping the game alive. And I think that's the hard thing for referees at the moment. They're like, the metrics that they get measured on are often around ball and play time, speed of ball, how attractive the game was, etc. Amount of penalties they give away, and effectively you could give away a penalty at every ruck, probably against both teams, to be fair. But I think at the moment, the trend from what I've seen in the Rugby Championship is the referees are favouring the team that are going forward. And to go forward, you need quick ball. To get quick ball, you need to clear bodies away quickly. And the angle and the height and the methods you use to do that, as long as it's done quickly, doesn't always have to be on the legal side of it, if you get me. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's jungle rules really. And Ireland's breakdown is very good, and yeah, we're going into that. We're going into this World Cup having been very much on the edge, but I think you need to be.
Yeah, it's funny. There are similarities I found over the summer just watching hurling and stuff, with the way the flow of the game and the refereeing is spoken about, where I can't even remember his name now, but he was reffing the hurling final between Limerick and Kilkenny, and got a good deal of praise for the way he let it flow. And it's similar to rugby, where if you're a referee that's letting things flow, it's likely because you are overlooking a lot of things you should and probably could be penalizing.
Yeah, totally.
Swallow the whistle is the way to get the reputation.
And also, this World Cup is a massive World Cup for the game. New fans potentially tuning in. They want it to be entertaining, and that's where the game has changed. I think in the old days, the referees got promoted or got games based on their ability to apply the laws. In lots of cases, and I'm not saying these referees don't have to apply the laws; they do, but they are there to basically make sure the game is entertaining. And I'm a purist sometimes as well. I can like a 3-0, but the majority of people and new fans, entertaining for them is fast and exciting. So that there's an onus in that. And look at you get the World Rugby debriefs in your email inbox. that's the ones that they push. You know what I mean? Faster, more tries, more points, etc., etc. So yeah, it's a challenge. You know.
Well, listen, hopefully it's fast and exciting this weekend. Ireland against Italy, Aviva Stadium, 8 o'clock kickoff live on RT2 and RT Player. Birch, thanks a million for joining us, and I'm sure
See you
we'll be
Saturday
seeing you again over the weeks this season.
Okay, thanks, Neil.